Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think we're a bit early, are we?
Yes, we are. I believe we have another 2 minutes.
Can I please start sharing my screen in the meantime?
You should be able to now. It's also just gone 10-2 on my side, and we are all up and running, so feel free to start whenever you'd like.
Thank you. Okay, I think let's start, and then if anyone else is going to join along the way. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our last THLE session for the semester. In fact, this is indeed the last lecture for the module. As you're aware, this is a semester module, and we have now come to the end of the module. So well done on hopefully successfully completing this module. We still do have our last assessment that is currently in progress. So I do hope that you have attempted online test 2. And if you haven't, please do remember that the test will be closing on the 11th. So ensure that you do attempt it before it closes, and remember that you only have one attempt. Today's session is going to focus more on consolidation, right? So yesterday we looked at a rounding up of the units. We took a step back and we looked and reflected on all of the units that we covered throughout the module. So we started from unit 1 and we went right up until unit 5. And we looked at the key areas of each one of the units and the most important parts of the units and how we could take the theory that we covered and actually make it quite practical. What we're going to be doing today is looking a bit more closely at lesson planning. We have completed the marking of your lesson plans, and this has been gone off for moderation. So we thought as a lecturing team that it would be quite useful to you as second years who are also still out at TP. After your break, you will be still back out at TP. We thought it might be a useful exercise for us to go through the lesson plan with you once again, looking at the key components of the lesson plan and how all of the different phases come together to work together to help you present a successful lesson in the classroom. Okay, so when we have a look at lesson plans, your lesson plan is firstly evidence that you've given critical thought to how you're going to deliver your lesson and that you've considered all the factors that will impact your lesson. And this is something that we did cover together in THLE201 and something that we've spoken about quite extensively throughout THLE when we covered each one of the units. The importance of planning and how your lesson delivery and the success of your lesson delivery fundamentally relies on how well you've actually planned. And the planning process, remember, is not just you putting words onto paper. It is a process of actually giving critical thought to how you're going to go about delivering your lesson, how you're going to go about actually presenting the content. And there's a number of different elements that should be included when we look at lesson planning. You're looking at things like where are my students currently in terms of their knowledge, and that's where prior knowledge comes in. Then we're looking at things like what do I want to achieve through this lesson, and that's where your outcomes come in. Then you're looking at, now that I know my students have prior knowledge, what am I actually going to do to activate that prior knowledge, and how can I stimulate my students' interest in this particular lesson? And that's what happens in your introduction. Then you're considering things like, now that I know what content I'm teaching, do I effectively understand the content? Number one, have I researched it? And if I have researched it, I need to place this in my references section of my lesson plan. And what teaching strategies am I going to select to ensure that this content is going to be effectively taught? So there's a number of different questions that you should be asking yourself when you're sitting with your lesson plan. And it should never become an activity of just filling in sections and phases of that lesson plan so that you can submit a document to be marked or document to be monitored by your head of department. Your lesson plan is one of the most essential components to determine whether or not your lesson will be successful, because it's an indication that you've given thought to how you're going to go about what you're doing. It's a plan, right? Like the name indicates, it's a plan. And if we think about this in a practical sense, whenever we want to be successful at something, we plan. We think about the pros, we think about the cons, we think about the best way of doing things, we think about what we want to achieve, we think about how we're going to achieve it. And that's what a plan in essence is, right? It's a way of knowing how we're going to achieve what we want to achieve. And that's exactly what a lesson plan is. It's your plan and your roadmap to helping you achieve what you want to achieve through your particular lesson. What's also quite important here, and this third point that I want to draw your attention to, very often if you're standing in front of the classroom and you're lacking confidence, remember, a key way to build that confidence is to know what you're doing. And the only way to know what you're doing is to make sure that you've planned correctly. You've thought about all of the different elements that need to go into that lesson. You've given thought to what was the most effective strategy. You've given thought to how you're going to assess this particular lesson. So one of the key ways of actually building your confidence as a teacher is to ask yourself the questions of, have I effectively planned? So a winning lesson plan is a sure way to actually help you to develop confidence in front of your classroom. We're going to quickly look at some considerations. So what does effective planning actually look like? You will need to have an understanding of your lesson plan. And we found that many of you have not familiarized yourself with that lesson planning document. So you are filling in the different phases, you are filling in the different sections, but there's no understanding behind what you're doing. You're filling in information in your introduction, but you're not sure what needs to go there. and you're filling in information in the prior knowledge, but you're filling in information that is just in your head, and you're not consulting with any kind of policy or document. So what we're going to look at today is what should be going in the different phases of the actual lesson plan. Where do I get this information from, right? And what questions should I be asking myself to help me to actually complete the different phases of the lesson plan? Secondly, you must go into your lesson already knowing what you want to achieve. So you can't get into a lesson and then decide this is what I want to teach or this is how I want to teach something. Definitely, there are going to be instances where things happen that you have not planned for. And then, as a teacher, you make judgments and you make a call on your feet. You should be able to be flexible and go with the flow of a particular situation. But it should not be a habit of yours to go into the classroom and then start making decisions, not having thought about them before your lesson. You have to know what you want to achieve before you get there. And what you want to achieve should be expressed through your lesson objectives. So your lesson outcomes and your lesson objectives are one of the driving forces behind an effective lesson, because this is exactly what you want your learners to be able to do by the end of the lesson. And as we progress through this lecture, we're going to also be looking at how should we be phrasing our lesson outcomes, because we found that you're really struggling with this. And if you're still unsure, please will you go to the section under Unit 3 and Unit 2 as well in your TPIP 200 on your ECI page. There's a lot of information that has been provided there for you. You can rewatch the lectures and you can engage with the material where we've explained to you exactly what words you should be using when you're phrasing your outcomes and what words you should be completely staying away from. What's the thought process that you should be going through when you are phrasing those outcomes? Please engage with the material. It's there to help you. We want to see that you're taking the theory and you're practicing it when you're out there at TP. And when we're marking assignments and we're looking at the way you're constructing these lesson plans, it's becoming quite evident that you're not really engaging with the material. Or if you're confused about something, you're not asking questions. And it's important that you do so. This is also a very, very important point. Understand your subject content. Research your content to extend your knowledge and consolidate what you already know. Now, it is not a crime to not know something, right? We are teachers. We are teachers in training. We are teachers who might have a lot of experience, but it is not possible for us to know everything. And it is also not possible for us to remember everything. Sometimes we've not taught a particular topic for a very long time, right? If we look at aspects of grammar, for example, we don't always engage with specific aspects of grammar. And because we don't engage with them on a regular basis, we might forget all of the rules, or we might not remember why there are exceptions to the rules, or we might not remember specific patterns and ways of doing things. And that's fine. But what's important is that you don't go in front of the classroom with gaps in your knowledge. You know beforehand what lesson you're going to teach. It is your responsibility as a teacher to now go and research that topic. Read up on the rules, revise the section that you're going to teach, ensure that you cover your bases, and if there's gaps in your knowledge, that you fill them before you get in front of the classroom. Your learners are going to be able to tell if you come there unprepared and if you've not familiarized yourself with content. So it's very important to ensure that you extend your knowledge and consolidate what you already know. Your assessors are coming out to assess you now for TP. And it's happened in the past where we go out and we assess our learners, our students in the classrooms, and we find that they're teaching incorrect content, or they are spelling incorrectly on the board, right? It's been known to happen. So therefore, you should always remember that there are going to be aspects of doubt. There are going to be moments where you're not sure about something that you're teaching, and therefore you need to ensure that you research before you go in front of your classroom. You familiarize yourself with your lesson plan, and you know what you're going to say once you get there. And the content is not something that you should be just thinking on your feet about, right? Once you're familiar with your content and once you understand your subject knowledge, the next thing you're going to ask yourself is what teaching strategies and activities are going to best suit the content to help me achieve my outcomes. Now, you've got a set of outcomes that you want to achieve, and you have a particular set of content that you want to teach. You need to find and identify the best teaching strategy and design the most effective activity to help you to achieve these outcomes. Not every teaching strategy is going to work well for every single lesson. Some content might work well with group work. Some content might work well with through a demonstration, or where you are illustrating a process to your learners, where you are physically doing something in front of them to illustrate something step by step. Or some lessons might just work very well if you simply go out there and you teach, right? You basically present the content. So what's important here and what you need to be able to do, and which you will develop over time in terms of your professional judgment as well, is selecting the most effective teaching strategy for that particular type of content. And if you find that you're continuously using the same teaching strategy, you need to reflect and ask yourself, am I going back to the same strategy because I'm comfortable with it? Or am I going back to the same strategy because it's actually quite effective? And we should be cautious not to fall into the habit of doing the same thing continuously because we're comfortable with it. We need to select strategies that are going to best suit our content and are going to help us achieve our outcomes. Then you need to be asking yourself, what do my learners already know about the topic that I'm going to teach? And this is prior knowledge. And we're going to be looking at this a bit later when we look at the actual lesson plan, right? Think about how these activities and tasks will be spread across all phases of your lesson plan. So you don't only have to have activities in your development. You can have activities in your introduction, in your development, and you can have activities in your consolidation. As long as the aim, if you understand what you are aiming to do at each one of these phases of the lesson plan. Because if you can answer the question, what is my aim? Then you will be able to design an activity to suit that particular aim for that particular phase of the lesson. So you should be asking yourself, what is the purpose of the introduction? What am I going to do to achieve the purpose? What are my learners going to do? What is the purpose of the development of the lesson? What will I do? What are my learners going to do? And then what is the purpose of the consolidation? And what am I going to do in my consolidation as a teacher? And what are my learners going to do? And then you need to be asking yourself, how will I assess if I've achieved my outcomes? Because this is quite an important part of teaching. Assessment is not just about getting a mark, right? It's not just about being able to fill something into your mark book. Assessment is very important for you as a teacher because it also helps you to reflect on whether or not what you're doing is effective. Are you actually able to achieve your outcomes? Are your learners, are you getting through to them through your teaching strategies? And if you're not, then are you already on a plan to start changing what you're doing? Right. Remember, if you give your learners an assessment, let's say you give them a test or a group of questions for discussion, right? And then you mark it. And you find that over 50% of your class has done very poorly. That's a point where you now need to analyze that assessment and ask yourself, are there gaps in their knowledge? Is it something where they are just not understanding? Or have I done something, or am I teaching in such a way that I'm not getting my point across? Have I not selected the correct teaching strategy? Have I not done enough to ensure that they have the prior knowledge that was required for this lesson? So that is one of the fundamental purposes of assessment as well. It's not just about giving your students a mark. It's not only about your students knowing where they are in the learning process, but it's also for you as a teacher to know where you are in your teaching process. You might remember this diagram from TPIP 200 when we looked at lesson planning, and it was the term of constructive alignment and the fact that your lessons are based on three very important principles: your learning outcomes, your teaching and learning activities, and your assessment. And we looked at the fact that each one of these components need to be aligned to each other. Your learning outcomes or your teaching and learning activities need to speak directly to your learning outcomes. So you design your teaching activities and you design your learning activities based on what you want to achieve in this lesson. And then you design your assessment based on what you want to assess, right? So a well-planned lesson will be constructively aligned, meaning all three of these components will actually speak to each other. They will be aligned. There will be no, if there's a misalignment, then your tasks are not going to, perhaps your assessment is not going to assess the content that you've taught effectively, or you're not going to be able to know whether you've actually achieved your learning outcomes. So we're going to look specifically at the lesson plan, right? And I've said, think of your lesson plan as a puzzle which is made up of a variety of pieces. And if the pieces do not fit, then we cannot see the bigger picture. So here we're going to break down the different pieces of your lesson plan. Now, before we get to prior knowledge, you have all of the information on the top of your lesson plan, your name, your surname, your student number, the number of students or learners in your classroom, your CAPS document number, is it a private or public school? Now, all of that information is very, very important, not only because we need to identify you, but also because it provides us with a bit of a context. How many learners did you teach in this particular class? If you had 40 learners in your class and you said you selected a particular strategy and you did individual assessment or you did individual assistance throughout the lesson, then as your assessor, we'll be able to say, but in a 45-minute lesson with 40 learners in your class, individual assistance is not realistic and not possible. Right? So it provides us with a bit of a context to your lesson. Or if you are teaching in a very nice private school and you've got 10 learners in your class and you say you use group work as a strategy, then we'll be able to say to you, look, that's not going to be very effective, because the point of group work is to have a number of students work together so that they can learn from each other, but also that different groups will be able to bounce ideas off each other. Now, if you have a class of 10, you're basically going to maybe have two groups. It might not achieve the same kind of end result. So in a situation like that, working in pairs might be more effective. So the information that you put right at the top of your lesson plan is important for us, as it helps us to have a context of where your lesson is currently, the grade that you're pitching it at, the context of the school that you're in, the number of learners that you're going to have or that you're presenting this lesson to. The other thing that's quite important there is your CAPS page number, and the fact that you should be attaching the CAPS page that you consulted with to your lesson plan. Just so that your assessor is able to have a look at it and ascertain whether or not you as a student was able to select the correct content from the particular CAPS document. Then we find prior knowledge, right? And prior knowledge is not something that you're going to just get from your head. You have to engage with the CAPS document here. So if you're teaching a grade 5 lesson to a grade 5, you're teaching a grade 5 class, you need to go to the annual teaching plan for the grade 4 learner, and you need to find out where this topic has been covered. The CAPS document is going to show you, okay, it's being covered in term 2, in week 5 and 6, and let's say the topic is on nouns. In term 2, by the time they completed this topic, learners are able to define a noun, and they are able to classify nouns into the different categories. So at this particular stage, this is the extent of their knowledge, that in this grade, they covered this amount of the topic, and this is what they're able to do. And now that I'm reteaching this topic, I know where to pick up from. I know that they've already able to categorize these nouns into groups. Now I should be looking at maybe expanding and looking at more categories, and then also having them identify nouns within the context of a story or a text. So in order for you to pitch your lesson at the correct place and in order for you to cover the correct content, yes, you are going to look at the annual teaching plan for your lesson, but in order to effectively fill in prior knowledge, you need to know what has happened before. So you can't just put in a general sentence here based on what you think you know. Prior knowledge has to be taken from the CAPS document. So the next time you're filling in your lesson plan, consider that. Look at the CAPS document. You've got grade 4 to 6 all in one document. So it's easy reference for you to flip through. I'm going to pause there. I'm not sure if there are any questions or anyone wants to add anything. Okay, if they are at any stage, you can please just indicate to me and I'll stop and take questions.
Will do.
Right, then we move on to lesson objectives or outcomes. And this is where many of you are actually struggling. The point of your lesson outcomes is basically what do you want your learners to be able to do at the end of the lesson. Now, we know they're going to get knowledge because that's your role. You're going to be teaching them things, right? So you're going to be imparting knowledge to them. They're going to be co-constructing knowledge together with you, together with their peers. So yes, there's going to be that process of knowledge exchange in the classroom. But the learner will know what a noun is not a learning objective. Because how are you going to assess this? Outcomes have to be measurable. They have to be clear and concise, and you have to be able to measure them. That means your learners must be able to do something to show you that they know what a noun is. So the learner will know what a noun is, or the learner will understand what a noun is not a lesson objective. What you should be saying is the learner will be able to identify nouns from a text, or the learner will be able to define a noun. So what are we doing there? You're basically telling us what the learner will be able to do. They are demonstrating their knowledge to you. So we should not be using words like understand and know at any given point. So none of your lesson objectives should ever say the learner will know or the learner will understand. Replace those words with action verbs that they're actually going to be able to do these things to show you that they know, right? Define, demonstrate, classify, categorize, discuss, explain, negotiate, right? So these are different action verbs. Your learners are literally going to be able to do these things. And an easy way to remember it is that your learners can't do understand and your learners can't do know. So there's no way for you to measure this. Your objectives have to be measurable. So the next time you phrase an outcome, ask yourself, are my learners going to be able to do this? Because they need to show me that they know something. How are they going to show me that they know something? The only way they're going to be able to show me is if they explain it, or they discuss it, or they identify it, or they classify it. So think about the next time you do a lesson objective, ask yourself, what are they going to be able to do? What do I want them to be able to do at the end of the lesson? And that's the most effective way of remembering how to phrase your lesson objectives. Some other key components of phrasing your lesson objectives. Please do not write your objectives as a paragraph, okay? Place them in, very seldomly do we tell you a bulleted list is acceptable in academic writing. But for your lesson objectives, please use a bulleted list, okay? You should be phrasing your lesson outcomes as complete sentences, right? But these sentences can be presented in the form of a list. So you can use bullets to present them in the form of a list. Keep them clear and concise. There's no need to use complicated, fancy language. We want you to get your point across to us, and that's most important. So keep it simple and keep it clear and concise. You're not getting marked for the most extravagant vocabulary. You're getting marked for how realistic and how achievable and well phrased your objectives are. So keep those things in mind when you're phrasing your lesson objectives. The next thing is the lesson phases. So you've got 3 phases in your lesson plan. You've got the introduction, you've got the development, and you've got the consolidation. And we'll look more specifically at these 3 phases a bit later in this lecture. But what's important for you to remember? Yes, Ms. Mavisa?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I
No,
just
no
wanted
problem.
to add something to the lesson objectives before we
Sure.
move on. One other thing that I've also realized is the issue of repetition, where we do have, by the end of the lesson, the learners will be able to, then when students list their objectives, they repeat the very same things, and it makes the work to look clumsy because of that repetition.
That's very true. I think that's something we've picked up with our marking as well. So when you've got the opening sentence, by the end of the lesson, the learner will be able to, and you've got the colon there, right? There's no need for you to start saying at the beginning of every lesson objective, the learner will be able to, the learner will be able to. It's not necessary. You can just go straight into phrasing your lesson or presenting your lesson objectives, because you've already had the opening line, you've got the colon, and the colon now is indicating that there's a list to follow, right? And the opening sentence is going to basically be the sentence to complete each one of those outcomes in the list. Thank you very much, Ms. Mavisa. That's also quite an important point. Have a look at your lesson plan after you've written things down or you've typed things down, and edit the same way you'd edit an assignment, because this lesson plan gets marked, right? Either by your mentor or it gets marked by your assessor, but also just for you when you are a practicing teacher. It is very important when you're done with any piece of writing, have a look at it, read it, decide whether or not there are perhaps more effective word choices that you can make, or if your spelling and grammar is correct. It's a very poor impression when you are spelling incorrectly or your grammar is quite poor. So it's important for you to have a look at your plan once you're done with it, and start and ensure that you're actually submitting something that is sensible and something that's well thought through. Right, so we were saying here at lesson phases. So we've got the 3 lesson phases, and what's important here for you to ask yourself is, what is the aim? What do I want to achieve at each stage of the lesson? Because if you know what you want to achieve, then you'll know how to design your lesson activities. Anything that you design, you need to design with an aim in mind, right? And it's quite evident when we are looking at lesson plans that some students are just designing activities for the sake of having an activity. And that's really not the road you want to go down as a teacher, right? Think very or decide very earlier on in your career of the type of teacher that you want to be. And the aim should always be that you want to provide your learners with the most effective learning experience. You're playing quite an important role in the learning process of a child, and it's important that you take this seriously. A lot of the time we think that our lesson plan is actually just a piece of paper, but it's actually quite important, because it's determining what direction you're taking your lesson in. And it's also determining that you made the effort to think about all the possibilities and then the best way of doing something, because you want to present your learner with the most effective learning experience. And that's ultimately what it actually boils down to. Then the other component that you'll find in your lesson plan is assessment. And here, once again, most students just go to a worksheet or a test. There are so many different ways of assessing your learners. And it's important to sometimes think out of the box, be a bit creative. You want to engage them, especially in the intermediate phase, because they're not too young to understand complex activities, and they're not too old to feel like you're patronizing them if you're quite fun and creative in your lesson. So it's quite a lovely phase to be in, and you should take advantage of this as a teacher. Be creative with your assessments. Leave an impression on your learners that they want to come back into your classroom the next day. Keep in mind what your learning process was like. And a lot of the time when we say assessment, it brings up a lot of anxiety for our learners, right? They're anxious. And when you say test, immediately sometimes it's not even about them not knowing how to approach the test, but it's just the anxiety of knowing that there's going to be a time limit, and then this is going to be marked, and I'm going to have to think in the moment. And so think of creative ways of actually scaffolding this assessment process. Think of fun ways of assessing. And this doesn't mean that we shouldn't do formal assessment, because tests, control tests, and examinations are very important. And we should be able to prepare our learners for these types of assessments. But with that being said, we should also be using creative ways of informally assessing them, so that they become familiar with the process of assessment, so that they become comfortable with the process of assessment, and also so that you are designing an assessment that is actually going to achieve the outcomes. Remember, the results of an assessment are as important for you as they are for your learners. So know in the beginning what you want to assess and how you want to assess it. Make sure that you set your standards and your criteria before you go into the assessment. If it's an oral, if it's something that requires a rubric or a checklist, have a set standard of criteria before you actually start the assessment, because you need to tell your learners what their expectations are before you actually start assessing them. Then, the dreaded Bloom's taxonomy on your lesson plan. Okay, so this is not as difficult as some of you think it is, right? In THLE, we looked at the cognitive levels of questioning, and that was particular to the home language. In THLE201, we gave you Bloom's taxonomy. Different schools might use different taxonomies. A taxonomy is basically there to categorize the levels of questioning, right? It's very like the way we did with the cognitive levels of questioning. Bloom's taxonomy is very similar. It's different categories of questions. Now, throughout your lesson, you find you are going to be asking your learners questions. You're going to include questions in your tasks. You're going to include questions in your worksheets, but you're also going to, in the beginning, in your introduction, surely you're going to be asking some questions, and those questions are going to prompt discussion. So what, in this section of Bloom's taxonomy, you look at the different categories, and then you ask yourself, which question was a simple recall question? Which question was a knowledge question? Do I have a question in my worksheet that might be an evaluation question? And then basically take those questions out and you place it in the different categories there in your lesson plan under Bloom's taxonomy. If you're not sure how to look at the different categories, please go to the ECI page on THLE201 under Unit 2 and Unit 3. We've provided you with the material. It's a matter of reading through it and familiarizing yourself with it. The same with the cognitive levels of questioning. It's not there for you to just memorize for a test. It's there for you to understand so that you can use it when you're designing your assessments. Become comfortable with it so that you can just tell me, if I say, right, give me a question that belongs in the evaluation category. You should know immediately this is what evaluation requires, and you should be able to phrase a question. So familiarize yourself with this, become comfortable with it so that you can use it for your actual lesson planning. Now, the other step that you tend to leave out when it comes to the Bloom's taxonomy. In your lesson plan, you will see that it says you need to provide the questions, but you also need to provide the phase in which the question is being asked. So if you ask a simple recall question in the beginning, so you'll put the question under knowledge, and underneath that you will say introduction. Or maybe you asked a question in the development, then you'll place it there, development. Or in the consolidation when you are rounding up your lesson, put the question down and underneath it say consolidation. What are you doing here? We want to see how your lesson progressed. Were you asking key questions, and at which stage in the lesson were you asking them? That's basically what the taxonomy section is there for. We want to know, have you been prompting your learners? Were you asking them key questions? Were you asking them questions to see what their level of knowledge was? And if you were, where were you doing it? Were you doing it in the introduction? Did you do it in the development? Did you do it in the consolidation? If it's in an activity, right, most of the time you place your activities in the development. So you will put there, if the question's taken out of the activity, you put that it's there in the development section of the lesson plan. Then extension or enrichment activities. Now this is quite important. A lot of you basically just say you will give your learner another worksheet, or you will have them color or draw or take out a book and read. Those are not extension or enrichment activities. Extension and enrichment activities need to be based on the lesson that you just taught. So you need to design a lesson that will extend your learners beyond that lesson, but based on the same content. So you're providing them with an activity that might give them more practice, or an activity that might be a bit more difficult than what you did in the classroom, or an activity that might have them think about a different approach of doing something, but still based on the topic that you covered in the class. An extension activity is not to occupy your learners. Always remember, you're a teacher, you're not a babysitter, right? So at no stage should you just be providing your learners with anything to keep them busy. We shouldn't be giving them coloring at the end of a lesson. It's not necessary when you can provide them with an activity that's actually going to enrich what you just taught. So think about this very carefully. And when we marked your lesson plans, we commented on this and we said, think about this carefully. You've taught this specific content. Now, this content had nothing to do with the creative arts. It had nothing to do with coloring or the colors on the color wheel or anything. So why are your learners now drawing or coloring something? Unless it's a diagram that links directly to the content that you've taught, then that's different. But always remember that your enrichment activities are there not for occupying your learners, but to do exactly that, to enrich what you've just taught, to extend their knowledge beyond what you've taught in that particular lesson. Okay, any questions? Anything to add? I'm sorry, I can't see anyone's little screen, so I'm not sure if you're putting your video on to add, so you can just stop me at any time to my colleagues if you want to add.
There are no questions on YouTube or in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Ms. Navisa?
Yeah, I wanted to say no questions at the moment. We can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. All right, then we're looking at learners needing special attention. Now, there's a number of different reasons why your learners might need special attention. Okay, and we know that there's a number of barriers that our learners might face, or just might be a learner that requires a bit more time to complete a specific activity. Think very carefully about the most effective way to help this learner. And a lot of the time we say individual assistance, or I'll pair them up with another person. And it's not wrong to do that, but there are other ways of assisting learners. You could design a little activity or a little worksheet where you say, right, do this activity first, or let's try and scaffold the activities before we can get you to the main activity. It's about actually putting the effort of saying, why are you giving this learner special attention? Do you genuinely want to help this learner? You want this learner to be helped to understand the content or complete the assessment. And if you're genuine in wanting to assist that learner, then you're going to go the extra mile. You're not merely just going to say, right, sit next to this person because this person's going to help you. Because that's not really a strategy. Yes, we can make use of that from time to time, but we should not be turning our very diligent learners into our teacher assistants, because that's not what they're there for, right? We can definitely have them teach each other. They can learn from each other, because learning can be a very collaborative process, but we need to give a lot of thought to how we want to help our learners that require special attention.
Sorry to
Then we
interrupt.
look at
Just like to let you know we only have 2 minutes left in the session.
Okay, thank you. Then we look at reflection, right? And we spoke quite extensively about reflection in the past. You only complete reflection once you're done with your lesson. So for those of you that completed the reflection in your assignments, those were not marked. Remember, your reflection is done after you've presented a lesson. And in your reflection, you need to be honest with yourself. You need to be honest. You need to ask yourself, are you actually looking, are you reflecting and thinking about the best way to move forward if you do this lesson again, or what went wrong and how can you change it? It's not a crime to have your lesson not go according to plan, but what's important is what have you learned from that particular experience. And then lastly, we have your references. We do not just want to see the CAPS document here. There are many different sources that you should be looking at when you're looking at references. If you only put the CAPS document in your reference list, what you're essentially saying to your lecturer or your assessor is that I've not researched my lesson at all. The only thing that I've done is read the annual teaching plan, which I had to do for content purposes. So consider that. The fact that you should have more than one reference on your reference list in your lesson plan, because it indicates to us that you've actually made the effort of researching your lesson. Okay, if there are no questions, I think I can round up here. Are there any questions? If there's anything else that anyone wants to add, Ms. Mavisa, I'm not sure if Mr. Nwayo is online.
There's nothing from my side.
Okay, students, if there's no questions from your side, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure for the lecturing team to have taken you for THLE201. We really do sincerely hope that the strategies and the theories that we've gone through this semester are going to help you in your teaching. Remember, like we've said to you in the very first lecture, we don't want the theory to be dead theory to you. Familiarize yourself with it, have an understanding of it, and use it in your classrooms. It's there to help you make your teaching more effective. So please ensure that you're constantly looking at the content and trying to improve yourself. We are going to place a student feedback questionnaire on ECI. It is completely anonymous, so please will you ensure that you complete that for us. It's important for us. It's a way for us to reflect on our teaching as well, and for you to reflect on your learning process through this module. And yes, please just remember to complete online test 2, and all the best. Thank you very much.